right, welcome back. I'm Michael Stamatinos, your host for the Advancing Healthcare Innovation Show. And if you're new to us, we're super excited to have you here. We're really crazy passionate about healthcare innovation and adoption. And if this is your first time tuning in, let me tell you a little bit about who we are, what we do here. We're a healthcare innovation company. We're focused on bringing stories of innovation within healthcare to life. And our aim is just really about highlighting people that are truly innovating within the space, giving them a platform to share their stories with the world. We've got an incredibly action-packed year with new content, amazing speakers, which I can't wait for. But if you haven't checked out any of our historical interviews, go ahead, hit subscribe now button, and check out some of the ones that are in our archive libraries. And we're just really, really excited about what we're talking about here. I wanted to introduce our first guest, fellow healthcare innovator, Megan Butler, Director of Pittsburgh Venture for America. Megan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Michael. Thrilled to be here today.
Yeah, so just maybe let's kind of backtrack, because I know your story has kind of been in and around healthcare innovation, and you're taking a little bit of a different stint to driving access now. Can you maybe give the audience a little bit of a teaser of sort of who you are, what you're about, and then sort of kind of diving into what you're working on now with Venture for America?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for that introduction, Michael. So, I never really envisioned myself working in healthcare innovation, honestly. I was always really passionate about healthcare and healthcare access and healthcare equity. And when I was in school, I pursued a master's degree in healthcare policy and management. And when I was a student, I actually always envisioned myself working in either legislation or policy or something like that. Like I said, I was really passionate about healthcare inequities that I saw in the country and trying to drive change in healthcare. And I think before I really got my footing in the professional world, I thought, policy and legislation were some of the main ways that you really could drive change.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly that is true. But now that I've worked primarily in healthcare innovation and entrepreneurship, I've definitely seen the ways that entrepreneurship can also drive very meaningful change in healthcare and across industries. And in fact, in some ways, entrepreneurship can be a lot quicker when it comes to driving change. There are all these roadblocks and red tapes to driving change through policy and legislation. So clearly, policy and legislation are still really important when it comes to healthcare, but I've definitely been surprised in my career. I never envisioned myself kind of working in entrepreneurship, but since I found myself here, I think it's a really meaningful way to drive change in healthcare through a career. But just to give, kind of my path to where I am right now in my career, when I first, graduated, I guess I should also say that you mentioned my title is Director of Pittsburgh for Venture for America. I'm based in Pittsburgh, and I'm really passionate about Pittsburgh and just, growing the ecosystem here, the entrepreneurship ecosystem. So I went to school in Pittsburgh, and I've worked in Pittsburgh ever since. So I also love the fact that my job allows me to focus specifically on this region and this community that I'm passionate about. But when I first, got my master's degree and was out in the professional world, I worked for a while for a small healthcare startup here in Pittsburgh. Um, again, was not necessarily intending to work for a startup, but just kind of came across this opportunity, really loved the work that they were doing, and worked there for a couple years. And then I worked for a healthcare foundation here in Pittsburgh, working in innovation and entrepreneurship, but kind of from the funder side of things. And I've been really fortunate to be in my role at Venture for America for a few months now, and that's been a really exciting way to just further connect with the entrepreneurship ecosystem here in Pittsburgh. Um, so it's interesting too because this is kind of my first role that isn't necessarily healthcare specific. In my role through Venture for America, I work with all different types of startups, but certainly still really passionate about healthcare and life science innovation. And I feel strongly that healthcare and life sciences are two of the most promising industries here in Pittsburgh. So, kind of combining, multiple angles of my interests, my regional interest and my industry specific interest have that's been one of my favorite parts of working for Venture for America.
Well, I think one of the things that you and I connected on initially from overlap was just this passion for wanting to create and be a bridge builder for those that don't necessarily have the opportunity to maybe get into certain organizations, maybe from backgrounds that are maybe commonly overlooked. And you mentioned how, you know, equity is something that you care deeply about, and access. Can you maybe share a little bit about, from a workforce perspective, how you guys are sourcing, finding talent, and equipping talent and placing them into these startup communities?
Yeah, thanks so much for that introduction. And you're absolutely right that access is such an important topic, both when it comes to access to healthcare services, but also when it comes to access to certain career paths and entrepreneurship in general. And that's certainly, Venture for America, we are a national nonprofit organization that works in 13 different cities across the country, Pittsburgh being one of them, and Pittsburgh being my primary focus. But as a nonprofit, Venture for America is very mission driven, and a large part of our mission really is decreasing barriers for folks who want to pursue careers in entrepreneurship, whether that's founding your own company or whether that's, being a leader at an existing startup organization. But yeah, the discrepancies when it comes to folks who are able to pursue careers in entrepreneurship are really stark. I think it's something like less than 1% of all venture capital funding goes to Black women. Just huge inequities in general when it comes to the folks who are starting companies. And I think when we're talking about healthcare specifically, it's more important than ever to make sure that the folks who are starting tech companies and other companies that are um, trying to improve healthcare in our country, it's more important than ever to make sure that those companies represent the folks that the companies are trying to serve, right? Um, Patients in the country represent all different backgrounds, all different races, all different genders, all different identities. So if the folks who are starting companies in healthcare don't reflect those identities, it's pretty unlikely that the technologies they're creating are going to be able to serve those folks in a meaningful way. So what Venture for America does is we run a 2-year fellowship program for recent college graduates who are interested in pursuing careers in entrepreneurship. So we get folks from across the country who apply for our program, all different locations. And the way that the fellowship program works is our fellows are able to work boots on the ground for startups in our 13 different cities, Pittsburgh included. And they're really able to get that experience to see what it's like to work for a startup, how a startup organization runs. And, Venture for America throughout that 2-year fellowship is providing support in terms of connecting fellows with resources, providing them mentorship opportunities. Just because some of the inequities that really persist in entrepreneurship are due to people not knowing where to go to access those resources, right? Entrepreneurship is a really challenging career path for anybody to pursue. So, in order to succeed, you really do need that network of support.
Yeah.
Um, so, at Venture for America, we really aim to reduce some of those inequities by providing a supportive environment for folks who really want to pursue those career paths.
So are there specific ways that you guys equip them, whether it be through digital means, training, or is it really kind of on site? Talk about that process, and maybe even talk a little bit about
Yeah.
some of the things in your short time that you've been in this role, things that have really surprised you in a, in a good way, or maybe even in a way that's just been like, oh, well, okay, maybe there's an opportunity there.
Yeah. So, one of the biggest ways that we help our fellows is through a 2-week intensive training camp that we do. So, over the summer, typically while fellows are kind of looking for their jobs throughout the different regions, or maybe in some cases they've already found a job, we host. Well, the past 2 years it had been digital, it had been online just due to COVID, but this year was the first year post COVID. Well, I mean, we're never really post COVID, but you know what I mean,
Yeah.
now that it's a little
Yes.
bit safer. We hosted our 2-week training camp in person this year, and that's really an opportunity for Venture for America to get together with the fellows and really equip them with the resources that we think are going to help them be successful working for a startup organization. Just because working for a startup is pretty unique, right? Like you need a unique set of skills in order to succeed in working for a startup. And sometimes those skills are not the same skills that you needed to be successful in college, right? Like you could get straight A's and a perfect SAT score and not have the resiliency, the get up and go, right? Like there's just working for a startup's hard. Typically, startups are under resourced and typically the types of folks who are most successful in that environment are really able to take a lot of initiative. They're able to kind of make things happen without a lot of hand holding. So through that 2 week process, we really have a series of trainings and workshops and interactive activities that help the fellows to kind of hone in on those skills and just give them a preview to what it's like to kind of dive into working for a startup. But
It's
that, I mean,
it's
that's kind of the beginning of the fellowship. So then throughout that whole 2 years, my role is the Pittsburgh community director. So a lot of my role is checking in with the fellows, making sure, they're being supported. I plan events in Pittsburgh to help the fellows network with folks in the region, make connections, all that good stuff. So we try to keep the support going. And then even when they graduate and they're alumni, we definitely want to keep in touch with them too. So yeah, we provide support throughout all of the steps of the process.
there's aspects of entrepreneurship that are spoken about, the allure of it, and then there's the other side of it, which is really not kind of talked about, which is, man, it's bloody hard. It's difficult. It takes an enormous amount of grit. And I think when you're innovating as well, there's an element of entrepreneurship in innovation, because you're talking about perhaps even maybe building up processes that are new, that haven't existed before, or tweaking ones. I remember a story where I was working with a digital health startup, and we were talking about their customer acquisition strategy, and I said, well, what's your onboarding process for new customers? Like, well, what do you mean? Like, it doesn't exist. You got to build that out. So they had an intern. The intern was like, well, I've never done this. We're like, well, that's great. Let's do it together. So talk about, I think, when you mentioned about having resiliency, the other probably virtue that is probably often underlooked, not really focused on, is the adaptability factor, the ability to be able to traverse environments that you haven't necessarily been in before and respond in a way that's positive, productive. And I think that's what's working in a startup is all about. Is you're talking about a blank canvas. So there's blessings in that, because you can create whatever it is you want to create. And then on the other hand, there's folks that work in a startup and they come to find out that there's not enough structure for them to feel comfortable in that kind of environment. They end up working for maybe in a larger organization. Have you seen a contrast in the number of fellows that have decided to stay within entrepreneurship, within sort of the startup scene? Or have you seen, I guess, what are the metrics that kind of breaks it down from people staying within the startup world? Because it's kind of like a love-hate thing. It seems like it's very polarizing, or is it really a middle ground there?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our fellows do stay in the entrepreneurship sector. So we do have a number of fellows who go on to, found their own companies, which is amazing and wonderful, and we want to support them. But even for the folks who don't found their own companies, we do see a lot of fellows do still end up working in the startup ecosystem. Sometimes it could be as like chief of staff for a startup or in another, key leadership position. And of course we do have fellows who end up graduating the program and decide, the startup world is not for them, and so they move to the corporate world or something like that, and that's obviously also fine. Young professionals, sometimes it's hard to know exactly what you want until you have the experience and you've kind of lived that. Although I will say that, when we are interviewing potential fellows and applicants to the program, we definitely try to hone in on who is specifically interested in working for a startup. Because we get a lot of applicants from folks who are interested in change or social justice or, really making an impact in the world. And that's wonderful. And we want to support that. But we also want to make sure that the folks who are going through the Venture for America program are specifically interested in careers in entrepreneurship, because, like you said, it is really challenging.
Yeah.
So if you don't kind of have that drive or that passion for working in entrepreneurship specifically, Venture for America might not be for you. And that's totally fine. But we do kind of try to parse that out early just to make sure that the fellows who do go through the program have a really positive experience. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think having that boots on the ground experience working for a startup does, in a lot of cases, help a fellow see, do they really want to take the next step to found their own company one day? I think a lot of folks who apply for the program are maybe thinking, maybe one day I would like to start a company myself, but I'm not sure what it's all about. And I'm not, maybe I have some fears about the unknown, which again is all totally fair and valid. And I think like the Venture for America Fellowship gives folks a way to explore that interest in a more like safe environment.
Yeah.
But that is, I mean, talking about being uncomfortable and having to do things maybe you're not familiar with. I think another attribute that's really important for somebody who wants to work in startups or in entrepreneurship is being comfortable with failure, which is really hard. And that's something I think like a lot of folks need to work on for a long time to really be completely comfortable with it. But the fact of the matter is, when you work for a startup, you really do have to be okay with failing from time to time, just because the nature of the work is so much more. You're taking more risks. You're having to do things like you said that maybe you've never done before, but it needs to be done. So now you get to build this new process. So I think like having an opportunity to practice failing and getting comfortable with the idea of failing is also really important for folks who want to work in the entrepreneurship space.
Yeah, for those that are tuning in, I think you just brought up a really good point that I want to hit home. And there's a subtle difference between failing and the failure. So someone that goes through a process perhaps doesn't work out, and it's what I see is sometimes at least the newbies that haven't been through it before learn the difficult way, and they personalize that setback to them. And that can sometimes put you in sort of a negative tailspin. And I say that because I've actually personally gone through that. So when you look at it as, well, this didn't work out, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm a failure, that I'm a failure. It just means, hey, this particular thing didn't work out. This is a failing. Let's spring leap into the next thing. Let's keep moving forward. So it's really all about moving forward. So there is a difference between failure and failing. And most of the time when you're in this kind of environment, if you're failing fast, failing quickly, there's all these different buzzwords and terms that are out there in the startup world. That failing quickly just means that you're getting a data point, you're learning something, and you're moving forward, and you're iterating, you're testing, and you just keep moving forward.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. And I think there's also something to be said for not personalizing your work in general too much, because I think like a lot of young folks especially have the tendency to view their work identities as kind of their whole self, right? And so if they do
Yeah.
experience a failure at work, they tend to take that as, like you said, kind of like a personal failure or a reflection on who they are as a person. And I think it can be really good for folks' mental health if they kind of find a way to separate, something can go not as well as planned at work, and that doesn't necessarily impact, like, it doesn't mean you're a bad person, right? Like, you can have
Yeah.
challenges at work and still be a wonderful human being. That's just something, especially because we work with folks who are like kind of fresh out of college through Venture for America. I've definitely seen like a lot of young folks especially struggle with that idea of like their work selves kind of being um, their whole selves, right? And like finding that balance.
Yeah. If all of your value only comes from your output and how you perform at work, I can honestly just tell you personally, that is not a winnable game, because there's going to be seasons when you win, and there's going to be losing seasons. So you have to
Yeah.
be able to deal with the ups and the downs of it. I mean, if there's one thing that's going to be constant, it's going to be change. So you're going to have to
Yeah.
get sort of used to what that is. Just kind of diving in a little bit deeper about how underrepresented folks that kind of come into the program, how do you go about educating? It's obviously things like this that can kind of get the message out. What has been in your time with the organization, what has worked well? What has gotten the ability for you guys to build bridges with some of these underrepresented folks to come into a program, or just to understand about what the program is doing, what it offers, because until you and I connected, I had no idea that something like this even existed.
Yeah, yeah, and that's definitely part of my job is, spreading the word, especially in Pittsburgh here, about Venture for America and making sure that folks are aware of it. But I think when it comes to, getting folks who have been historically underrepresented in spaces of entrepreneurship and technology, it does take work. And it takes intentional relationship building, because we've definitely seen that folks who are referred to the program by friends or colleagues, or maybe somebody who went to college the year before them, and their buddy says, "Oh, I did Venture America, you should do it too, it's great." Those referrals are usually the strongest indicator of somebody actually like going through the fellowship, which is wonderful. Like, we love when people refer other people, but that referral process also has a tendency to mean that we have like folks who are referring other folks who might end up looking similar to the folks who already went through the program, right? So in order to get more representation and more diversity, I think you have to be really intentional about that. And we have a wonderful recruitment team at Venture for America that works on building relationships with colleges and universities. And I know that they've done a lot of work to build relationships with historically Black colleges and universities, and other universities that serve historically underrepresented folks in tech, in order to make sure that those voices and those folks are represented in the program as well. Um, but yeah, I mean, and something that we do at Venture for America as well is we have what we call RISE coalition groups that are different affinity groups for folks who have different identities, whether it's identifying as a woman, as Black, as LGBT, as Hispanic or Latinx. We have different groups for those fellows to get together and collaborate, and their fellow led groups as well. So we actually have leaders within each of those RISE groups who are able to kind of coordinate the meetings. They can put together programming and events to help, whether it's like bringing in a speaker or doing another kind of team building event. So that's definitely an opportunity for folks who have certain identities in tech to get together and talk about the specific challenges that they might be facing. Because that's definitely like a challenge we've seen too, is, if you're a woman in tech, for example, um, and you are facing a specific challenge, it might be really hard if you don't have that support network of other women that you can kind of just
Yeah.
like talk through the challenge with. So creating those RISE groups, is what they're called, has also been, I think, helpful for improving the experience of folks who come from those underrepresented backgrounds.
In general, having authentic community is such an enriching part of life.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes years to be able to find that core group, but it sounds like you're able to sort of facilitate these environments that are safe, where people can come in, maybe share some setbacks, share some little wins, and kind of breathe belief into that, and it then kind of pours into the work. Can you maybe share a little bit, if you don't mind, maybe some successes, some success stories that you've heard that have been inspiring, that you can kind of maybe share with the audience?
Yeah, well, I can share that right here in Pittsburgh, we have three fellow alumni who have started their own companies here in Pittsburgh, and
Nice.
they're all doing some really, yeah, they're all like very socially minded, which is wonderful, and they're doing some really impactful work here in the community. So I'll just do some quick shout outs for them. Jordan Robarge, who did our fellowship back in 2015, he was actually the first class of fellows in Pittsburgh. So we've been in Pittsburgh for about 7 years now. He was one of the first. He's founded a company called Revival Chili's. So he has both a brick and mortar restaurant and like a food truck that he does for events. And he's very progressive and socially minded. His company makes it a point to hire folks with felony convictions in their past who typically have really big barriers to employment. So
Yes.
he's doing some really cool work there. And just as an aside, like, just because this is a healthcare podcast, I know I'm definitely a big advocate for healthcare being beyond the four walls of a doctor's office. There's so
Of
many
course.
social factors to health, and being able to access stable employment, I think, definitely is a part of a person's health, right? So
Absolutely.
I think that's really cool. Louis Manel founded a company called Carbon Compost, which focuses on composting and incentivizing folks to compost, which, again, like the environment, I feel like is another kind of
Yes.
overall factor in improving health. And that's definitely like a big topic here in Pittsburgh, improving like environmental health for community health. And then Talfa Harris is a VFA alum who founded a company called Sustainable. Sustainable actually focuses on helping to evaluate other startups and other small business ideas. So she's been able to kind of um, have a startup that helps other startups get their feet off the ground, which is really
Yeah.
exciting. So yeah, I looked up the number just so I would get it correct, but about 30% of alumni from VFA have gone on to start their own business. And VFA alums are about 4 times more likely to start their own business than other recent college graduates. So just kind of wanted to shout out those stories in Pittsburgh specifically. We have other really cool stories happening nationally, but I'm kind of closest to the ones right here in
Right
Pittsburgh.
on.
So yeah, those are some alums from our program who are doing some really cool things.
So let's just kind of put the spotlight on you for a moment here. What's the best way for folks to follow you, your work, the work of VFA? Um, Floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks so much. Well, definitely check out, Venture for America's website, ventureforamerica.org. I will just put a quick plug out there that we are accepting applications for our 2023 class right now. So if you know seniors in college or folks who are a couple years out of college, up to a couple years out of college, please encourage them to apply for the program. We have a deadline coming up on October 31st and then another one in January. We kind of have like rolling deadlines until the end of the academic school year. If folks want to connect with me specifically, feel free to shoot me an email. My email is Megan, Megan .butler, Butler at ventureforamerica.org. I'm trying to get the Megan at ventureforamerica.org, but I'm not the only Megan. But it would make it so much shorter. But for now, it's my first name, not last name.
Well, Megan, I'm excited about the work that you and VFA are doing, especially as it pertains to building bridges, creating access. Workforce is something that is very much been top of mind for a lot of organizations, big and small. And what better way to look and find leaders that are in underserved areas and to kind of build them up to equip them on their journey, whether it's they want to work within a small startup or start their own. I think it's really great work. So for those of you that have joined, if you found this content helpful for you, would you mind sharing it on social media? Would you mind commenting or liking, subscribing, just with your network? I'm so grateful when conversations like these make a difference to advance healthcare forward, not just in the context of what traditional healthcare is, but health in general, as Megan pointed out, outside of the four walls of the hospital. And just even more grateful to bring in more innovators and doers inside of this community. So Megan, it's been awesome. It's been a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to connecting back with you at some point down the road and getting some more stories.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me to the show, Michael. This was a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to staying connected.
Awesome. All right, we'll see you soon.
Thanks.